This is Media Psychology Lecture 2, and I'm Dr. Matthew Giobbi. In 1968, an article entitled Plato's Pharmacy appeared in the avant-garde French literary journal Tel Quel. In what would later be published in his 1972 book Dissemination, post-structuralist thinker Jacques Derrida recounted Plato's dialogue, the Phaedrus. As Socrates tells it, in the Egyptian city of Naucratis, there was a famous inventor named Tooth. One day Tooth was meeting with the king of Egypt, a higher god named Thamus, and he shows off his new inventions. One by one, Thamus applauds Tooth's contributions to Egyptian culture, but one invention he does not approve of, the technology of writing. Whereas Tooth views writing as a great boon to memory and knowledge, Thamus views writing as the thin end of the wedge towards stupidity. For Thamus, as well as Socrates and the Phaedrus, writing gives the appearance of knowledge, but is not true knowledge. Of course, the irony is that we are reading the voice of Socrates, who never wrote, written by Plato. Derrida later explores this in his book, The Postcard. The argument is perhaps the first ever to take place in writing concerning the introduction of a communication technology. The conclusion of the experts: this new technology will make us stupid. This argument will be taken up with the introduction of every major technological shift throughout history. Beginning with this oral to written shift, to the mechanical mass production of the movable type press, to photographic, sound, and cinematic recording, radio and television broadcast, right up to today's digital revolution. The argument remains the same. This new technology is going to change us. The truth is, our technology does change us. But before we get into that information, let's take a look at where Derrida goes next in his essay, Plato's Pharmacy. Derrida points out that Tooth refers to his invention, writing, as a pharmakon. The Greek word pharmakon is an ambiguous word meaning both remedy and poison. It's like the English term drug. If we think of writing as a pharmakon, as both a supplement and a poison, we begin to think less in either-or terms of good or bad, and instead consider the technology as an ambiguous supplement. The question is not, is this new technology good or bad, but rather, how does this technology affect the particular environment? Derrida actually uses this term supplement to illustrate that writing is simultaneously an addition to and an enhancement of speaking. It adds something to speech. In time, writing takes over speech, and in turn will be supplemented by some new technology. Embedded in this supplementation is the Hegelian dialectic, which we discuss in depth later in this lecture. We have taken from this post-structuralist analysis, what we have taken from this analysis is that we must avoid the binary opposites of modernity, that's good, bad, right, wrong, and instead understand the technology as both an ambiguous event and identical to its predecessor. Yes, the technology will inevitably affect how we think and live. However, we assess rather than judge based on the environment and situation in which it exists. Sigmund Freud said that civilization began when people started throwing words rather than stones. With each new technology, we find a shift in how we think. The oral tradition conjured the myths of Homer, the written tradition expressed the thinking as philosophy, mechanical reproduction manifested as modernity and Enlightenment science, and the digital revolution has brought us the convergence of postmodernity. We see that technology becomes the shaper of thought. With the precise mechanical measurement of time came the analogous clockwork models of the universe. The technology of steam hydraulics influenced Sigmund Freud's model of psychic pressures. Cognitive model of psychology has understood the brain as a computer and thinking as software. The way we view the world, what in psychoanalysis we call the Weltanschauung, is analogical to the tools we use. In media philosophy, there is an ongoing debate between those who believe that the tools we develop influence our lives, they're called the determinists, and those who view technology as technology, a means for communication and transportation over space and nothing more. And it's called the Instrumentalist View. We recall Nietzsche's typed response to a friend who noticed a change in his expression of ideas since using the writing ball. You are right, our writing equipment takes part in the forming of our thoughts, said Nietzsche. The idea that we become the tools we use, that human beings are sex organs of the machine world, was humorously explored by Charlie Chaplin in his 1936 polemic comedy, Modern Times. It was popular at this time for industry to consult what was termed scientific management, the application of industrial mechanism to the human worker. In 1911, Frederick Winslow Taylor, the high priest of human productivity, published The Principles of Scientific Management. In it, Taylor outlined the mechanized movements that would increase productivity in the blue and white collar worker. Chaplin's depiction of the Second Industrial Revolution in America takes a humorous look at how technology affects the social, political, economic, and the individual. In one scene, we find the little tramp unable to control his nervous system after a shift of repetitive actions. Eventually suffering from an emotional breakdown, Chaplin reminds us of the caution of Sigmund Freud. The joke is a release valve for something we are terrified of. Technology becomes an extension of our own biological systems. The technological supplement adds to and eventually replaces our biology. We see this in the phenomenon of virtual avatars and cyborgs. The idea that we are becoming increasingly artificial is evident in our autistic worship of the synthetic, our plastic physical enhancement through surgery, the obsession with perfection as seen in digital enhancement of the human through Photoshop and other imaging software, the sexual fetishization of inanimate objects, and the neuro-computer interface. The distinction between wet biology and dry circuitry is rapidly blurring. On one end, we find integrated electronic circuitry in the body, and on the other, we find silicon circuit boards that grow and reshape as does the nervous tissue. Some, like Erich Fromm, view automaton conformity as something that removes us from humanity. Others, like Donna Haraway, see a metaphor for overcoming the patriarchal and phallocentric myths that centralize some while marginalizing others. German philosopher Wolfgang Schirmacher has described Homo generator as the evolution of our species. He says, in the prehistoric age, this generating of worlds was absorbed to the gods, at the climax of global mechanization, to the shamans of science, and it is only now, in the encroaching post-technological epoch, that the immense world-engendering powers of Homo generator become evident. This creation is by no means purely cerebral, neither is it limited to the realm of perception, but concerns the whole person and embraces embodiment and communal action as well. An artificial life is led as the art of life by a person who exists authentically, whose ethic is anthropologically characterized by openness. Since the founding of the modern age by Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, this prospect has inspired daring projects in the most diverse minds. I mention here only Hegel, Schopenhauer, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Bataille, Heidegger, Sartre, Arendt, Foucault, Lacan, Levinas, and Deleuze. Contrasted with Fromm's Homo consumens, the consuming man, and Haraway's cyborg, Schirmacher's Homo generator is an adaptive, post-ethical being that lives the authentic life, but free from any connotations as that authentic means today. This is the self-generating Übermensch of Nietzsche. Contrasted with Fromm's Homo consumens, the consuming man, and Haraway's cyborg, Schirmacher's Homo generator is an adaptive, post-ethical being that lives the authentic life, but free of any connotations that authentic means today. This is the self-generating Übermensch of Nietzsche. Let's follow this thinking of Schirmacher through with an evolutionary appraisal of the supplement of digital technology. In 2011, the journal Nature asked 6 experts to comment on the effects of video games on the biological, individual, and social levels. In response to 5 questions, these neuroscientists described the research findings without an agenda. The conclusion: the nervous system adapts to the fast-paced, highly complex visual world of video games and digital media in general. This means that the nervous system of gamers is much more efficient at fast-paced visual stimulation than is the nervous system of non-gamers. However, when faced with slower tasks, such as deep reading and print media, gamers perform significantly worse than non-gamers. This is a post-ethical observation of the evolutionary adaptation to homogenerated environment, the EEA. Michael Merznick, an authority in neuroplasticity and the effects of media on the nervous system, adds, there is growing evidence that intensive use of video games results in significant generalized improvements in cognitive functioning. In fact, the experts in Nature reported that gamers showed an increase in processing speed, attentional control, memory, cognitive control, and social control. An inverse relationship was noted between gaming and academic performance. However, the experts point out that this is most likely reflecting the result of time spent gaming rather than studying, not a side effect of game playing. Clearly, the shifting from a fast-paced medium, time-based digital media, to a slow-paced medium, like static print on the page, results in processing conflict. The research also indicates that individuals who are adapted to slow-paced media have a similar deficit in performance when shifting to fast-paced media. The evolutionary psychologists and psycholinguists tell us slow, deep reading is not a natural ability. The evolution of numeric and alphabetic symbolic meaning and how the brain adapts to repeated processing of this, called learning to read, is closely studied. Evolutionarily, we are better adapted towards listening and speaking than we are towards reading and writing. We are also evolutionarily equipped to process the very things that video games and other fast-paced media offer, stimulus that changes, distracts, and has novel movement. This is called bottom-up processing, from senses to the brain. Deep reading and slow-paced media are learned exercises in top-down processing, from fantasy to thought. The evolutionary advantage of remaining aware in a fast-paced environment is obvious. Our ancestors survived because they were able to detect dangers in the environment that others could not. Technologies can be understood as supplementing in one of 4 ways: increasing strength and dexterity, as in construction tools, increasing the senses, as in eyeglasses and microscopes, reshaping nature, like reservoirs and pills, and intellectual technologies, like measuring devices and other extensions of thinking. Just as the labor tools that we use influence how we work, the intellectual tools affect how we think. Development and change takes place on the micro level. That's neurons, hormones, neurotransmitters, and gene mutation. And on the macro level, cultural, social, political, and economics. In psychoanalysis, we refer to the biological system as the libidinal economy, and the social system as the political economy. In Lecture 4, we will discuss the psychoanalysis of media in depth, but now we will turn our attention towards the development of structures of the media industry. We can understand the media industries as 9 distinct media. These are books, newspapers, magazines, film, recording, radio, broadcast television, cable television, and the computers and internet. How these 9 forms of media developed and exist today as industries can be understood in a life cycle pattern. As Potter points out, each of these 9 industries have a unique history, but all share some developmental patterns that we will outline to gain an understanding of the media industries. Cycles are about patterns of change. Just as human beings undergo physical, cognitive, personality, social, and moral patterns of development, so do media industries. These industries share 5 stages of development from birth to ultimately death. These 5 stages are innovation, penetration, peak, decline, and adaptation. The innovation stage has two aspects: the technological innovation, that's inventing the technological medium, and the marketing innovation. That's where an entrepreneur creates a business that uses the technology. An example of technological innovation is the development of the motion picture camera by the Lumière brothers. The public presentation of the films at the Salon de l'Indien and the Grand Café is the entrepreneurial marketing and innovation. Identifying a public need is essential for the marketing innovation to take root. Many technological innovations have remained shelved due to a lack of public desire or an absence of effective marketing of the medium. Penetration occurs when the new medium creates a new mass media channel. The mass culture envelops the new channel which, as Potter describes, satisfies existing needs or creates new ones. At its peak stage, a medium commands the most attention from the public and generates the most revenue, according to Potter. A medium at its peak will be challenged by a novel medium at the innovation stage. At this point, the medium enters the decline stage, which is marked by a loss in revenue and a drop in usage. The final adaptation stage is marked by a redefinition of the medium, a repositioning achieved by identifying a new set of needs that the medium can meet because the old needs it used to fulfill are now met better by another medium. Radio repositioning itself as a portable, niche station medium in contrast to the penetrating television is an example of the adaptation of the media life cycle pattern. In his 2011 documentary, Page One, Inside the New York Times, filmmaker Andrew Rossi documents the issues that print newspapers are facing adapting to the new media milieu. The media landscape is altered with every newly introduced media innovation. All of the traditional media, legacy media, books, newspapers, magazines, film, recordings, radio, and TV broadcast, have reached an adaptation stage. How a medium adapts to new technologies is a central story of media economics and media politics. The issue of a traditional magazine going digital or a newspaper stopping its presses is a social and human story with real implications. This makes it of central interest also to the psychology of media. We turn now to a social level of media psychology, namely the economics of media. We will define media economics, describe the basic forms of media economies, and then describe the capitalist, Marxist, organizational, and pragmatic analyses of the media industry. For most of us in the United States, when we take a course in introductory economics, we are taught capitalist economics. Unless the course includes a chapter on comparative economies, we are taught capitalist economics as if it were the exclusive definition of economics. In fact, capitalist economic theory is one of 7 broad categories of economic theory. These include market economies, planned economies, mixed economies, traditional economies, participatory economies, gift economies, and barter economies. Each of these categories of economic systems have different subtypes of economic theories. The capitalist system is also known as the market system of economics. At the soul of capitalism is the drive for capital. The laissez-faire, let-it-alone philosophy holds that natural laws of supply and demand and the desire for profit is self-regulating and does not require coordination or planning from outside the political system. This means that in a capitalist economy, anything goes regarding how information, goods, and services are produced, distributed, and consumed, the 3 aspects of any economic system. Capitalist economics is built on the belief that the incentive for economic exchange is personal profit. The model understands 3 levels of economics as the desire for profit in the relationship to supply of a commodity and demand for that commodity. Due to the ultimate goal of profit, capitalist economics is interested in creating demand for a commodity, which we call advertising. The relationship between supply and demand determines the value of a commodity. If the demand is high and the supply is low, the value is increased. In natural resources such as water and fuels, there is a fixed supply. In synthetic and artificial commodities such as information, art, and the media, the supply is limitless, so that in order to make it valuable, it must be artificially limited through limiting access and increasing demand via advertising. In other words, in a capitalist economy, where profit is the driving engine, the ultimate goal is not to provide commodities as needed, but rather to profit from the need for those commodities. During the Industrial Revolution, the means to mass-produce goods was established. Mass production of every commodity, from food to clothing to automobiles, resulted in the ability to provide adequate supply. In the capitalist model, this devalued the commodity, which resulted in a lower profit. There are only so many shirts that one person needs. In order to sustain profit, capitalists used advertising and propaganda to increase desire for new items, essentially turning the individual from a need-based consumer to a desire-based consumer. New commodities that are entered into the capitalist system typically follow a life cycle pattern. This pattern includes the innovation stage, the penetration stage, the peak stage, the decline stage, and the adaptation stage. The innovation stage is comprised of the technological innovation, the movie camera or the computer technology, and the marketing innovation, the entrepreneur creating commerce from the new technology. Recalling the Lumiere brothers' invention of the moving picture camera, that's the technological innovation, and the public sale of tickets by the manager of the Grand Café, that's the marketing innovation, illustrates this innovation stage. The development of new media channels into a mass media, available to many people in many places, is referred to as the penetration stage. It is during this stage that we see the establishing of new theaters and movie palaces during the early 20th century, or the availability of personal home computers in the late 20th century. Once a new media is available to most people in most places, it enters into its peak stage. This means that the medium is the primary commodity to fulfill a specific demand in a culture. Eventually, another innovative technology will enter the market, and the medium will enter a decline stage. At this point, the medium must undergo redesign and redefinition to maintain a presence in the market. That's what we call the adaptation stage. Each of the 9 major media channels has a distinct life cycle pattern. The innovation stage of newspapers began around 1600 and lasted through the 19th century. From 1850 to the early 20th century, newspapers penetrated the market, eventually peaking around 1910. Since the 1950s, the newspaper has been adapting to the innovations of radio, television, and now the computer. In capitalist media economics, there are goals, players, and rules. The goal of each of the players is the same: to maximize the value of the exchange for themselves. The value of an exchange is determined by a cost-benefit analysis. Costs and benefits come in various forms: financial, time, cognitive energy, and material resources. Evaluating net loss and net gain or net win is an essential determination for all who play the capitalist game. The question that each player must ask themselves is, does the benefit outweigh the cost in this exchange? Net value of an exchange can be determined by subtracting the resources spent from the resources returned on any transaction. In capitalism, if there is a profit, the transaction is worthwhile. The 4 players in the capitalist system are the consumers, advertisers, the media companies, and the employees. All of the players are also consumers, seeking to exchange our money and time for entertainment and information. With a population of 310 million people in the U.S. and over 6 billion people worldwide, consumers are the largest and potentially most powerful player in the game. The power of the consumer can be organized and directed by media companies through advertising or through themselves through consumer organization. If advertising is the lever of the media companies, media literacy and consumer advocacy is the leverage for the consumer. Media employees also have the ability to advocate for their interests when they organize into bargaining unions. However, the individual employer or consumer is only powerful if they harness in numbers their collective influence in the game. Media employees are typically described as being below-the-line employees or above-the-line workers. Employees who are classified as below the line are easily replaceable and typically have minimal skills or specialties. These employees are the least powerful individually but have the potential to be the most powerful collectively. Above the line employees have specific skills and professional training and are therefore not easily substituted. It is in the interest of media companies to make all employees easily replaceable, thus lowering the value of their services. This means, paradoxically, that the more educated and skilled a population, the more easily replaceable the worker and the less power they yield in the game. The organization of employees is necessary to have influence in the capitalist system. Potter points out that there are 5 salient characteristics of the capitalist media industry that are necessary to be literate players. These are valuing resources, indirect versus direct support, interdependency among players, nature of competition, and advertising as the engine of media economy. The first skill of media literacy is being able to evaluate the value of a resource accurately. 2 questions should be asked when valuing and giving a resource. How well will this resource achieve its goal? And how scarce is the resource? Considering the particular goal of the transaction is a good place to begin the evaluation of any resource. Understanding that media industries make profit from both direct, paid subscription, and indirect advertising streams is an essential aspect of the game. A book has a direct revenue stream, whereas a magazine has direct and indirect revenue streams. When indirect profit is a source of income, the consumer is the commodity being sold. The interdependency between media means that a loss or profit in one area of the industry typically affects other areas of the industry. The relationship between wage earner, wage payer, consumer, advertiser, and producer are all dynamically interrelated. By evaluating the whole rather than the immediate interest in a transaction, one becomes aware of a more global value assessment of a transaction. We can understand the nature of capitalistic competition in 3 concepts: monopoly, oligopoly, and hegemony. A monopoly is defined by one provider of any one commodity. This means that there is no competition for the distribution and sale of a given commodity. That results in complete control by one entity over that commodity. An oligopoly, which describes most of mass media, is a limited number of entities controlling the commodity to the consumer. And hegemony refers to the social and psychological predominance that one entity can have over the production and distribution of a commodity. Hegemony exists any time one refers to facial tissue as Kleenex or paper towels as a Scott towel. This type of brand identification is the high goal of advertising. Cultural hegemony is a concept developed by the Italian Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci. The central idea is that the attitude and worldview, the Weltanschauung of the mass culture, is shaped by the messages that are broadcast by the mass media channels. These channels serve as the megaphones for the ruling class of a society. In short, media is power. The Marxist critique of capitalism is a central part of the cultural media studies and critical theory of the media. Marxist economic theory is a planned economic system. meaning that it involves making certain rules that keep any one player from gaining a disproportionate amount of power in the game. Like all economic theories, the Marxist theory is not merely an economic theory, but also a model of social and personality psychology. The psychoanalyst Erich Fromm regarded Karl Marx as one of the greatest psychologists of the 19th century. In the U.S., Marxist analysis is severely hindered by the residue of the mid-20th century propaganda put forth by Senator Joseph McCarthy. McCarthyism and the shaping of attitudes of Marxism as an un-American activity has created a lasting attitude that has kept Marxist theory on the fringes of academic and popular discourse. However, most of the concepts that Marx described are wholeheartedly supported by most people when the labels Marxist or socialist or communist are not used to describe them. For example, the subscription-based format of the online music platform Spotify or Grooveshark is a planned socialist model rather than a capitalist free market model. Whereas individual profit is the goal of capitalism, social equality is the goal of Marxism. Based on the idea that we are what we have, Marx proposed that all individual and social ills were due to material inequality of haves and have-nots. The goal of Marxism is to eliminate material differences and distribute resources equally. The idea that we are influenced by our economic situation is called historical materialism. Marx felt that the poverty and wealth affected how one thinks more than anything else, including ideas. The art, political, and legal systems, education, and culture of a society is based on its economic condition. Marx described the economic situation as the base and the cultural characteristics as the superstructure. In a humorous illustration, psychoanalyst Slavoj Žižek explained that the economic base level, French, German, and English society, was expressed in their toilets, the superstructure. Ideology is at work, Žižek says, precisely when you do not think that you will find it. Even buildings or houses, built but in-house appliances and so on, where you think we have just pure functional objects, even the most ordinary everyday objects can be objects not only to use, but to think with them. It always interested me, the paradox of toilets, Žižek continues. Did you ever notice that if you traveled around the world, how different they are? In France, the hole of the toilet bowl is in the back, so that when you produce excrement, they quickly disappear into the hole. The German toilets, the old type, the hole is in the front, so that when you produce excrement, there it is displayed, but does not disappear in the water. This is the German ritual, every morning inspecting your shit. In the Anglo-Saxon world, the United States, you get the toilet bowl that is full of water, so that the shit floats in it before it disappears. A wide speculation came to my mind. From the late 18th century, we have in Europe the idea of the European Trinity. The three crucial European nations are France, Germany, and England, each of these standing for a certain level of social life and for certain politics. France is politics, the political domain, and the political left revolution. England, middle of the road, moderate, and economy. Germany, metaphysics and poetry and conservatism. It struck me, isn't this the key? France, revolutionary approach, hole for the shit in the back, it should quickly be liquidated. The Anglo-Saxon, pragmatic, let it float, let's be rational. And the German, metaphysics and poetry, you observe it and you think. End quote. For Marx, the superstructure expresses the ideology of the base structure. The ruling class of a society is the class that rules the material resources and determines how those resources will be processed. He referred to these aspects of the aspects of mode of production, as the forces of production and the relations of production. Marx was critical of the popular capitalist economies of the Industrial Revolution and said that the motivation for profit would invariably lead to two classes, those who own the resources, the bourgeoisie, and those who work to produce the goods, the proletariat. Marx also described the smaller classes of people, the petite bourgeoisie, who held cultural capital but not material wealth, such as professors, intellectuals, and artists, and the lumpen proletariat, who were bottom feeders, living off the crumbs of everyone else. These people have no class consciousness and have no awareness of the social issues at hand. There's an old Soviet-era joke that illustrates the Marxist critique of capitalism. A capitalist is walking through his factory with a friend. The friend asks, "What did you tell that man just now?" "I told him to work faster," answered the capitalist. "How much do you pay him?" asked the friend. $15 a day," answers the capitalist. "Where do you get the money to pay him?" asks the friend. "I sell products," answers the capitalist. "Who makes the products?" asks the friend. "He does," answers the capitalist. "How many products does he make in a day?" asks the friend. $50 worth, answers the capitalist. "Then," concluded the friend, "instead of you paying him, he pays you $35 a day to tell him to work faster." "Huh!" And the capitalist adds, "Well, I own the machines." "How did you get the machines?" asked the friend. "I sold products to buy them," answers the capitalist. "And who made those products?" asked the friend, to which the capitalist can only respond to his friend, but also to the media and to the schools, "Shut up, he might hear you." The profit motive defines capitalism as the continuous desire to increase capital. Political economists, those who are interested in how the ideology of an economic system affects individuals and society, describe how the profit motive shapes media business practices. We will discuss 4 patterns of media business: concentration, conglomeration, integration, and multinationalism. The profit motive defines capitalism as the continuous desire to increase capital. Political economists, those who are interested in how the ideology of an economic system affects individuals and society, describe how the profit motive shapes media business practices. We will discuss 4 patterns of media business. That's concentration, conglomeration, integration, and multinationalism. In their introductory text, Critical Media Studies, Ott and Mack describe the media industry economics of concentration. Marxist analysis typically refer to this pattern as oligopoly, and we will use these terms interchangeably. Oligopoly describes the dominance of a few companies in one area of the mass media. An oligopoly forms when a big company buys up smaller companies. The appearance of multiple companies remains, while the one parent company is in control of all major decisions. In the 1980s, there were 20 major mass media companies. Today, there are 5. These are Time Warner, Disney, Viacom, News Corp, and Bertelsmann. The Big 5, media giants, is led by Time Warner as the largest in the world. Time Warner owns major providers of new and traditional media from AOL to HBO. In 2012, Time Warner employed over 34,000 people and had a revenue of nearly $30 billion. Time Warner is the leading oligopoly of the media industry. Another pattern of media ownership is called conglomeration. A conglomeration of many different types of companies, both media and non-media. Integration between the conglomerate companies allows for seamless development, production, distribution, and marketing of a product. Vertical integration refers to a parent company owning all of the smaller companies that deliver a media product from start to finish. Ott and Mack illustrate vertical integration through the 1973 film The Godfather. They point out that Paramount Pictures produced the film, Paramount Home Entertainment markets and distributes the DVDs, Worldwide Television Distribution negotiates television broadcasts, and Famous Music licenses the soundtrack. All of these companies are part of Paramount Pictures Corporation, a wholly owned subsidiary of Viacom. Horizontal integration refers to a pattern in which one corporation owns and controls one stage of the production process for the entire industry. For instance, News Corp owns over 30 Fox television stations, which is a horizontal monopoly. News Corp serves as a gatekeeper for what makes broadcasts on a large portion of the television programming. As the saying goes, the media industry might not tell you what to think, but it tells you what to think about. The German-based powerhouse Bertelsmann serves as an example of a media multinational company. As of 2013, Bertelsmann operates in 30 different countries and employs around 100,000 people. Multinational companies offer culturally specific, tailored media delivery and content while being owned by a parent company. It is difficult to pin down a multinational's central identity. They are chameleons that take on the characteristics of their markets. Bertelsmann may be best known for its book publishing division, Random House, which is the largest parent company of book publishing in the world. When thinking mass media ownership, we associate Time Warner with magazines, Viacom with TV, News Corp with newspapers, Disney with merchandising, and Bertelsmann with book publishing. Now that we have a background of ownership patterns, let us describe some of the strategies in Marxist critique of the capitalist structure of media production and distribution, and in advertising. Marxist scholars describe 6 strategies which are used in the capitalist economic system to maximize profit. These are cross-development, advertising, spectacle, logic of safety, joint ventures, niche marketing. And each of these strategies has an effect on individuals and the social culture as a whole. Psychologically, the capitalist system assumes that there is a fundamental human drive for profit, an evolutionary predisposition towards acquiring resources. In the view of French sociologist Michel de Certeau, strategy refers to the actions of those who hold power, in this case a major media industry, and tactics are the actions of those who are marginalized. The profit synergy that can come from horizontal integration is called cross-development. An example will clearly illustrate this profit strategy. In 1993, the summer blockbuster mega hit Jurassic Park cost Universal Studios $56 million to produce. To ensure a profit from this investment, MCA Universal created a $65 million licensing campaign with 100 companies and 1,000 products. The campaign paid off when the film grossed $50 million in the first weekend. In that year, Jurassic Park could not be avoided. The cross-development strategy from Happy Meals to toys made the movie into a 2-hour commercial for Jurassic Park merchandise. Every corner of the media was saturated with Jurassic Park. In 1996, the Jurassic Park ride opened at Universal Studios Hollywood theme park. In the preceding example, we see how every subsidiary of MCA Universal was employed to cross-develop the Jurassic Park product. We next turn to how the potential media audience is presented with the media product that is intended for consumption. This is the strategy of advertising. Later in this series of lectures, we will be addressing advertising in depth. For now, we will engage in a Marxist critique of advertising. Advertising is a behavior. The analysis of behaviors, if not to be taken superficially, must be considered in the lens of the motivation behind the behavior. The behavior takes on different meanings with different motives. Take, for example, the difference between the person who steals a car to go joyriding and the person who steals a car to rush someone to the hospital in a life-threatening emergency. The contextual motivation affects the meaning of a behavior. Advertising is a behavior that can have multiple meanings depending on the motivation. In the capitalist system, where the motivation is profit, we always begin the analysis based on the capitalist goal, profit. Regardless of the product, from beauty aids to a life-saving pharmaceutical, the motivation is profit. If the motivation were not profit, the advertising would not be functioning in a capitalist system of economics. The Marxist analysis of capitalism looks at advertising as a form of propaganda which creates an artificial need for a product. To understand this more fully, we consider that the project of the first industrial revolution from the 1760s to the 1830s, which was mass production of products and food, came into full-scale production by the 1870s with steam power and electricity. This later mass production was referred to as the Second Industrial Revolution, and it lasted through the 20th century. With mass production came the ability to meet the needs of all individuals for food, clothes, and other products. The culture of this time was primarily a need-based citizen who purchased for practical reasons of effectiveness and quality. If one analyzes the ads of early capitalism and late capitalism, one will find a distinct difference in how a product is advertised. Early ads focused on the practicality and quality of a product. Later ads focus on a product's newness, uniqueness, and personal expression of a lifestyle image. The reason for this is clear. Once the true need for a product is met, the demand for that product plummets, resulting in a surplus supply, which in capitalism means a loss in value. How does a corporation continue to make high profits from a good that has been saturated in a given market? Make a new, better, and build in obsolescence. In so doing, the marketers create a desire, a false demand, for a product which increases its value, thus resulting in continued profit. There are positive and negative repercussions to creating desire through advertising. Firstly, continuous demand works its way down to creating and maintaining jobs and profits for the corporation. This means that families can have income to afford their needs. However, the advertising has another effect. It creates hyper-real desire for more, for the new, and for the lifestyle image which they aspire to. Buying becomes an expression of the self, a yardstick for worth, and a social cue for power. Of course, this artificial desire also results in there being haves and have-nots, which, Marxists argue, creates jealousy, crime, anxiety, and a whole host of other social and personal ills. Although we will be taking an in-depth look at advertising in the future lectures, I would like to sketch a brief history of one aspect of the field, television advertising. The first television commercial for Bulova watches ran on July 1, 1941, during a Dodgers-Phillies game. A decade later, the television advertising revenue grew to $12 million, and by 1960s, a 30-second television ad cost around $20,000. Today, a 30-second ad costs between $100,000 and $420,000. Super Bowl ads cost on average $1.5 million for a 30-second spot. In upcoming discussions of advertising, we will see that product placement and other forms of guerrilla marketing are replacing the traditional commercial. In clinical psychology, we discuss something called personality disorders. These are a collection of 10 maladaptive personality patterns students of psychopathology learn to assess and diagnose. A common method for teaching students to identify personality disorders is through cinematic, literary, and television characters. There is no better hunting ground for examples of personality disorders than reality television. The real unreality of reality television is an example of what French Marxist thinker Guy Debord called the spectacle. Debord writes, "Understood in its totality, the spectacle is both the outcome and the goal of the dominant mode of production. It is not something added to the real world, not a decorative element, so to speak. On the contrary, it is the very heart of society's real unreality. In all its aspects and specific manifestations, news or propaganda, advertising, or the actual consumption of entertainment, the spectacle epitomizes the prevailing mode of social life. It is the omnipresent celebration of a choice already made in the sphere of production, and the consummate result of that choice." Debord's spectacle is a conglomerate of realities framed in a particular narrative that becomes reified commodity for cultural consumption. I can think of no better illustration of Debord's spectacle than out of Yahoo News. The headline of Yahoo's online news service conjure up a scintillating, realer-than-real narrative that the true story can never live up to. The spectacle is the headline which, in its hyperreality, becomes the outstanding event. As Ott and Mack describe the phenomenon, life imitates art which imitates nothing at all. The allure of the spectacle is potent for profit maximization, but carries with it clear social and personal implications. The common practice of successful entrepreneurs is to break the code of a given business, make it successful, and then replicate it. This is the way a small business can grow into a highly profitable corporation. In media analysis, we refer to this as the logic of safety. Simply put, the logic of safety states that nothing succeeds like success. When you have a winning formula, the best thing to do is to stay as close to that formula as possible and minimize the risk of the profit loss. In cinema, we see the logic of safety in sequels and remakes. Investors can be assured, through the logic of safety, that a remake or a sequel will do as well as the original, even if it is not of the same quality. In television, the logic of safety manifests in spin-off shows. Sociologist Todd Gitlin refers to the trend of producers continuing a show beyond its series as recombinancy. Taken from a profit motive point of view, these are intelligent strategies for successful media investment. Minimize risk and maximize profit. But as a Marxist analysis will point out, they also carry consequences for society. The three main Marxist critiques are that the profit motive strategies of capitalism reduce diversity, restrict democracy, and fuels cultural imperialism. In his 1941 text on popular music, critical theorist Theodor Adorno pointed out that much of the music that we are provided with by recording companies is standardization and pseudo-individualization. He states, by pseudo-individualization we mean endowing cultural mass production with the halo of free choice or open market on the basis of standardization itself. Standardization of song hits keeps the customers in line by doing their listening for them, as it were. Pseudo-individualization, for its part, keeps them in line by making them forget what they listen to is already listened to for them. It's pre-digested. What Adorno was describing here in music is also applicable to television, cinema, new media. The logic of safety might limit the profit risk for investors, but it also limits the quality and diversity of media that is made available to a society. The logic of safety limits creativity, collectively resulting in the homogenization of the media. The multitude of channel choices on television, or the variety of films released in a given season, give the mere illusion of choice when in reality is the same programming with different packaging. This formulaic and cliched form of popular media can be experienced in every Jennifer Aniston film. Girl is sad, girl meets guy, girl becomes happy, girl loses guy and becomes depressed, girl gets guy and lives happily ever after. Same formulaic narrative every time. The danger in reducing diversity lies in the availability of contrasting ideas. When mass media is homogenized, finding contrasting content becomes a highly specialized endeavor. When an idea's legitimacy is judged by whether or not it has appeared in the mainstream media, the result is a restriction in democratic thinking. Democracy is the notion of equality, which in Marxist analysis does not seem to jibe with the capitalist practices. The ideology of democracy is inhibited due to the very nature of the profit motive. If programming is provided based on the criteria of easy consumption, won't scare away viewers by challenging the think or feel differently, then the media providers become gatekeepers of what the audience will have to think about. The gatekeepers not only set the agenda for what is thought about, called agenda setting, but also frame how the topic is thought about. For instance, the news media perpetuates an antiquated idea that third-party candidates, not Republican or Democrat, are somehow on the political fringe. In fact, many third-party candidates are more relevant to young voters today than the traditional parties. Treating the third-party candidates as fringe appears to many young voters as out of touch with contemporary socio-political culture. As media psychologists, criticism of capitalism is not only of social interest, but also of interest of individual psychology. At the heart of a political or economic theory, and both, lies basic assumptions about the nature of human beings and motivation. No better presentation of Marx as psychologist is available than that of Erich Fromm's Marxist concept of man. Although it is true that critical theorists of the Frankfurt School wrote extensively on humanist psychology of Marx, none did so with the clarity and ease of Erich Fromm. Published in 1961, Fromm's short treatise, it's under 70 pages, can serve to introduce the media scholar to Marxist psychology. The text is a commentary on the economic and philosophical manuscripts which Marx published in 1844. Although it is true that critical theorists of the Frankfurt School wrote extensively on the humanist psychology of Marx, none did so with the clarity and ease of Erich Fromm. Published in 1961, Fromm's short treatise, it's under 70 pages, can serve to introduce the media scholar to Marx as a psychologist. The text is a commentary on the economic and philosophical manuscripts which Marx published in 1844. Erich Fromm presents us with a humanist psychologist who expresses himself clearly in his early writings. Whereas capitalism is driven by the desire for profit, Marxism is driven with the desire to give man back to himself. Whereas capitalism seeks to enslave many for the benefit of a few, Marxism seeks to liberate the slave from industrial oppression and to return him or her to the nobility of the craftsman. Fromm tells us in his introduction. Marxist philosophy, like much of existentialist thinking, represents a protest against men's alienation, his loss of himself and his transformation into a thing. It is a movement against the dehumanization and automatization of man inherent in the development of Western industrialism. It is ruthlessly critical of all answers to the problem of human existence which try to present solutions by negating or camouflaging the dichotomies inherent in man's existence. Marxist philosophy is rooted in the humanist Western philosophical tradition, which reaches from Spinoza through the French and German Enlightenment philosophers of the 18th century to Goethe and Hegel, and the very essence of which is concern for man and the realization of his potentialities. What we find here is not the Chinese or Soviet totalitarianism that was touted as Marxism, but a genuine humanistic interest in restoring man's life to himself. Fromm continues to tell us that the central issue is that of the existence of the real individual man who is what he does and whose nature unfolds and reveals itself in history. In this light, we are presented with a philosophy of protest. It is a protest imbued with the faith in man and his capacity to liberate himself and to realize his potentialities. We find here a Marx who is deeply concerned with the shaping consequences that a material economy have on the human sense of self. Fromm adds, Marx sees man in his full concreteness as a member of a given society and of a given class, aided in his development by society and at the same time its captive. The full realization of man's humanity and his emancipation from the social forces that imprison him is bound up, for Marx, with the recognition of these forces and with the social change based on this recognition. Marx was first and foremost concerned with what he was seeing happening to man at the hand of industrial mass production and its handmaiden capitalism. Marx recognized the shift from the skilled artisan of pre-industrialization to a worker who had a sense of self based on the multi-dimensional aspects of their craft, to the unskilled laborer who merely sold their labor as a resource to function as a meaningless part in an assembly line mass production. This has been referred to as Fordism in contemporary scholarship. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the mechanization of labor was used to increase production efficiency and profit. As we discussed in the first lecture, the loss of specialized craftsmanship and the introduction of unskilled, easily substitutable labor resulted in a dehumanization of the individual. We find this apparent in the anecdote from our lives. When traveling in the old country, or when visiting homes with their heirloom furniture, we are confronted with something peculiar. Whereas we have no problem resting our feet and shoes on mass-produced IKEA coffee table, the handcrafted artisan table carries a certain dignity. We do not place our shoed feet on it because it glows. No matter how much we polish a mass-produced table, it will not have the same glow. This has been said to be due to the fact that the artisan's soul has entered into their table, whereas the mass-produced table has no soul. It has no craftsman. Rather, it is a simulacra that has no individual identity or origin. We find here an illustration of Marx's fear of the loss of something in the means of production of our goods. Marx's concept of materialism was not the misunderstood capitalist idea of want, but rather a sense that the individual proceeds from their material environment. The payoff in the artisan production is not only the commodification and necessary money exchange for a good or service, but also the spiritual experience of putting oneself into one's product. We find this tradition today with those who still practice the trade of an artisan. We might ask at this point, what does this mean for man and woman in a mass media world? How does the mechanical reproduction of reality, such as the photograph or the mass distribution of electronic media, come to affect who we are and how we view ourselves? These are the very questions that are being asked by social theorists, media effects psychologists, and neuroscientists today. When we ask the question, is the internet changing the way you think, we are directly addressing the materialist concerns that concerned Marx in 1840. In his economic and philosophical manuscripts, Marx describes how an economic structure can shape the personality of people in a given society. Marx quotes, "In direct contrast to German philosophy, which descends from heaven to earth, we ascend from earth to heaven. That is to say, we do not set out from what men imagine, conceive, nor from men as narrated, thought of, or imagined, conceived in order to arrive at men in the flesh. We set out from real active men on the basis of their real life process, which we demonstrate the development of the ideological reflexes and echoes of the life process." Marx is discussing here materialism as the force of physical pressures on the shaping of personality rather than a spiritual or idealist pressure proposed by Hegel in his dialectical Zeitgeist. Marx says, Hegel's philosophy of history is nothing but the philosophical expression of the Christian Germanic dogma concerning the contradiction between spirit and matter, God and the world. Hegel's philosophy of history presupposes an abstract or absolute spirit, which develops in such a way that mankind is only a mass which carries this spirit, consciously or unconsciously. Hegel assumes that a speculative esoterical history precedes and underlies empirical history. The history of mankind is transformed into the history of the abstract spirit of mankind, which transcends the real man. The Hegelian dialectic serves as a model of how forces interact with each other in historical terms. For Hegel, a spirit of the times, called the Zeitgeist, was an immaterial force that existed as a certain cultural mood. A predominant zeitgeist would eventually give rise to an antithetical zeitgeist called the antithesis. That comes into conflict and negates the original thesis. The result is a synthesis. Whereas Hegel's dialectic was one of immeasurable cultural mood, Marx's material dialectic referred exactly to material, economic, and political forces. Fromm tells us that Marx is confronting real economic and political pressures on man rather than ephemeral ideas. Marx wrote, "The way in which men produce their means of subsistence depends first of all on the nature of the actual means they find in existence and have to reproduce. The mode of production must not be considered simply as being the reproduction of the physical existence of the individuals. Rather, it is a definite form of activity of these individuals, a definite form of expressing their life, a definite mode of life on their part. As individuals express their life, so they are. What they are, therefore, coincides with their production. both with what they produce and with how they produce it. The nature of individuals thus depends on the material conditions determining their production. Regarding what drives us, what is the motivation of humans, Marx has pertinent insight. Regarding human drives, he differentiated between constant or fixed drives which exist under all circumstances and which can be changed by social conditions only as far as form and direction are concerned, and relative drives which owe their origin only to a certain type of social organization. Marx assumes sex and hunger fall under the category of fixed drives, but it never occurred to him to consider the drive for maximal economic gain as a constant drive. Marx emphasized the means of production. He proposed that the way man produces determines his thinking and desires, and not that his main desires are those for maximal material gain. In media psychology, we explore this concept of alienation in terms of how the media affects our social conception of ourselves. We do not have to look very far to understand the implications of media idolatry and the humanistic concept of alienation for the self. In media psychology, we investigate the implications of media representations of the physical body on individuals' concept of self-image. We observe the tendency for machines to become more human and humans to become more perfect machines. Through plastic surgery and Photoshop, the ideal ego is forming that can only be achieved through surgical or extreme measures. We see the implications in body dysmorphic disorder and various eating disorders. We can also see direct effects in body image issues and as a contributor to eating disorders. Perhaps a crowning example of this technological alienation is contemporary psychology's insistence that man is a computer. Talk of mental processing, memory caches, and neural networks has a return on its investment that results in a dehumanization of the self. We have understood the Marxist economic critique of the media industry on social and individual psychological levels. This is merely an introduction to an entire field of study in itself. We turn now to another form of critical analysis of the media, organizational analysis. Organizational analysis of the media industry is similar to the social psychologist's interest in how context influences an individual and the group. Taking into consideration how media production, distribution, and marketing affects an individual as worker or consumer is vital to being a well-informed media psychologist. In his 1939 article, Patterns of Aggressive Behavior in Experimentally Controlled Social Climates, Kurt Levine and colleagues demonstrated that the organization of an economic or political system can influence how individuals within that system act and interact. In his now classic study in social psychology, Levine and colleagues placed children in one of three social climate groups: authoritarian, laissez-faire, or democratic. In each of these groups, children were exposed to a teaching style that functioned with the same characteristic as a political system. Levine and his colleagues found that, depending on the social climate, children varied in interaction, productivity, personal and group morale. Circumstances and organization affects individuals and the group. Organizational analysis takes a close look at the organizational characteristics of the media institutions and speculates as to how this organization affects development, production, distribution, and consumption of the media. Let us take a look at American news media as a case study for organizational analysis. In the United States, the news journalism and the press has developed as a fourth estate. This means that the press is free to keep in check the other three branches of the government. It also implies that the press is part of the government. In the United States, the press is not state-controlled and has the constitutional protection to be independent of government censorship. However, the United States consistently ranks behind at least 30 other countries in press censorship. How can it be that a country that has constitutional protection of press freedom is not ranked in the top 5? The answer is in the very organizational nature of the news media. In the colonies of the New World, The press started as a way to inform and organize public opinion on the discontents of British and French rule. Understanding the nature and intention of the press in a given culture will illuminate how its current organizational structure came to be. It also brings to our attention how a system arises out of practicality, remains intact through tradition, and affects contemporary workers and consumers of the system. Just as Levine pointed out, if we want to understand the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of people, we must consider the context within which they function. In 1690, a broadside news sheet bearing the title Public Occurrences was banned after one printing. The British colonial government objected to publisher Benjamin Harris's critical tone of British rule. Newspaper publishing has served as a voice against authority from the very beginning of American culture. In 1765, the British government levied a stamp tax on all broadsheets, which made it prohibitively expensive to distribute the news. Economic systems and political systems can affect the ease of production, distribution, and consumption of the media. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution establishes that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of people to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for redress of grievances. The origins of the American political system took the press as being a necessary function of democracy. From its very nature, American press is a revolutionary voice that keeps government in check. After the American Revolution, the press began to align itself with a particular political ideology known as partisan press. In the 1800s, the economic model shifted from niche political party markets to attracting the broadest audience possible. This resulted in less partisan politics and more human interest stories that would appeal to the greatest number of potential customers. In an effort to reduce the costs of news gathering and reporting, 6 New York newspapers established an agreement to share content beginning in 1845. This consortium of newspapers called themselves the Associated Press. Newspaper owners and investors soon discovered that scandal sold newspapers. Muckraking soon became a way to attract readers, and thus advertisers to a newspaper. A particularly notable competition for readers and advertisers occurred between William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. The Morning Journal and the New York World published muck and sensational yellow journalism in an effort to attract the most revenue. This is an example of how the profit motive and ego can debase the quality of the news media. One needs only to watch 1941 Orson Welles' film Citizen Kane to get a sense of the dynamics between the early 20th century media moguls. Concerns about how the organization of news media was affecting the news content was expressed as early as 1920 when Walter Lippmann published Liberty and the News. After World War I, an interest in objectivity and professionalization of the news industry became of interest to many professionals and academics. The Hutchins Commission of Freedom of the Press was reported in 1947, and it served to standardize news industry practices. What followed were professional, accredited journalism schools and prizes given for journalism excellence. With accreditation and professionalization comes certain disadvantages. When we analyze media organization, we think about 4 prevalent informational biases. These characteristics of news media may not have been formally set as conventions, but might have arisen out of the given environment and survived as tradition. We refer to this practice as naturalization, or the quality being resilient. These 4 informational biases are personalization, dramatization, fragmentation, and authority disorder. We find a trend in newspaper reporting to present information focusing on an individual rather than a social whole. The effect of doing this makes the information more personal, more compelling, and alienates it from the social whole. Presenting a social issue strictly from an individual experience can give it the impression that it is their issue rather than our social issue. Research shows that we are captivated by individual stories, but also relate to those stories as spectator rather than participant. A similar bias to this personalization, the personal story, is the tendency to dramatize information. The tendency to order information into a narrative to tell a story biases the viewer into settling on the truth rather than the true complexity of how things occur. Dramatization biases news reporting towards a story rather than information. Fragmentation is a result of presenting news information in self-contained segments and articles. The practice results in a representation style that can lead the viewer to view the news as isolated and unrelated, rather than interdependent. The ignoring of the interconnectedness of news leads to shallow and often surface-level accounts of complex stories. Finally, authority disorder describes the bias of presenting stories in a way that plot authority, the police, fire, or the military, against disorder, criminals, natural disasters, and terrorism. Most of these stories we watch and read will focus not only on what happened, but create or enhance a shortcoming or difficulty that exists in the social situation. By the end, conflict and drama increases entertainment value, but biases the information. In 2002, a study by Ott and Ayaki, the authors, concluded the news media's fascination with personalities and drama over institutional and social problems bring closure and resolution to the larger social issues the public, such as public tragedies, raise, and does not serve the public well as a basis for social and political action. When professional conventions are established, certain biases are kept in check, yet new ones arise. The very establishment of professional conventions for news media have brought about significantly narrow, homogeneous, soft, and episodic. As media psychologists, we know that the pursuit of the phantom-like objectivity is difficult due to participant observation. We can talk of things as if they existed independently of our active observation, which in some senses they do, but this kind of conversation usually ends up listing characteristics of phenomenon being observed that are largely irrelevant and inconsequential. News media that reports objective information would read like a cubist painting. Structure, how power is distributed, and process, how it takes place, affect how information is framed in a story. In filmmaking, there are writers, producers, directors, actors, editors, sound crew, and technicians, makeup artists, etc. Each of these organized specialists yields some authority over the product. News media has been traditionally organized by copywriters, department editors, general editor, publisher, distributor, and sales. If a typical newspaper prints 40% news media and 60% advertising, this will greatly determine what, how much, and how in-depth a news story can be. If a news story negatively affects a major advertiser, the editor may choose that it is in the newspaper's financial interest not to report the story or to do so from a soft angle. Professionalization, the internalization of professional conventions as common sense, transforms individuals with free will into ideological subjects. These conventions can be scrutinized to better understand how they affect the worker and consumer. Typical analysis of how conventions are motivated, shared, naturalized, resilient, and directive. Careful considerations of each of these characteristics are beneficial for considering the psychological implications for groups and individuals. In his 1991 study, 60 Minutes in the News, A Mythology of Middle America, Richard Campbell illustrates the conventions of the media industry and their influence on how we in America watch and understand news programming. Campbell describes that the segments that make up a typical broadcast of 60 Minutes follows one of 4 conventional formulas. News as mystery, reporting presents the story within the narrative of reporter as detective, who uncovers wrongdoing. Campbell describes the narrative as including 4 stages: the identification of key characters who are framed as villains and criminals, the search for clues of criminal violation, the stalking and ultimate confrontation of the wrongdoer about his or her misdeeds, and the assurance that the wrongdoers have been brought to justice and safety has been restored. A second formula that Campbell identified is called news as therapy. In this narrative, the reporter takes the role of the therapist to, firstly, provide social commentary with moral meaning of the story, 2, serves as a confidant or to the interviewee, 3, celebrates heroic characters who come to the rescue of the victims, and 4, acts as a tough confrontational inquisitor who stands for popular moral values. The formula for news as adventure is another familiar one described by Campbell. The well-traveled and worldly traveler arrives to explore some little-known situation. The reporter usually acts as a surrogate traveler for the viewer who is in search for a simpler, uncorrupted time, a past still reflected in small-town middle American values. The reporter can also be protector against foreign values that somehow threaten traditional American heartland values. Finally, Campbell describes news as arbitration, in which the reporter is the referee or the judge. In this formula, the reporter is usually portrayed as a neutral observer who defers to the expert authorities, emphasizes a dialectical rather than expository structure, abandons the search for a clear, unequivocal villain, and resists proving narrative closure and resolution. We can see how these formulas can enhance the entertainment and interest value of the stories. However, as journalism or news, the formula shapes the content into a traditional narrative which retelling reinforces the way it is. News programming organized and presented in this way is not thoughtful but rather formulaic and soft retelling the same narrative while reinforcing the same beliefs. What is absent is truly critical thought about the issues presented.